something I think worth noting, and this is kind of where I want to take this. This Celtics team, despite the early comment, the Celtics are too injury prone. They have been missing guys in and out of the lineup here over this 13-game stretch that they've still managed to play good basketball at. And guys, one person in particular who has missed some time now is Jrue Holiday. And Jrue is somebody that I really want to get your guys' opinion on. Is this shoulder injury with Jrue, is this something that we should be concerned about? Or is Boston seeing, okay, Drew's got some soreness in the shoulder. He's on the older side. Let's give him an extended break because, he's going to he hasn't played the past 4 games and now he's going into the All-Star break. He gets 8 days off. Is this a sign of concern for fans of the Celtics, or is this just Boston being cautious?
I've noticed over the past couple injury reports too, he's pretty much listed right before any other player is pretty much early. So they kind of already feel they know oh, there I go. Obviously what it is and just how it could possibly pan out in the next couple of games. But yeah, I mean, they definitely could probably use this time, going into next week when we have that break to obviously see if it's any kind of concern. I mean,
so you think it's caution out of Boston? They're saying
caution out of Boston just because, yeah, I mean, I do. What is concerning is that they have him kind of early in the injury report before any other players are. But at the same time, from my standpoint, I think it just might be because they want to kind of rest him for the big stretch games that we have coming up next week. I know we have Philadelphia and all that, but right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the next half of the season is probably the most important too, because the stretch we had those last 8 games obviously was very important. It could have happened at a better time to get 7 out of 8 wins. But yeah, right. For Holiday is one of our main defenders too. I think it's just definitely important to kind of just keep him well suited and just, well rested, because obviously he's getting up there in age, almost like Horford as well. So it definitely is good to get those veterans just kind of settled and just see if they can maybe, kind of develop into more. Yeah, when that finishes up.
Yeah. I don't know if the shoulder is something to really read into, and I think it's a lingering injury that has been with Jrue Holiday since we did trade for him. It's been something that's been noted in his career history, but I think it's a more precautionary step for the Boston Celtics. If there was something to be concerned of, I feel like someone within the Celtics media would have gotten a hold of that and been like, Jrue Holiday is going to be out for an indefinite amount of time with a right shoulder injury.
Because there has been no report. There's been no report on a timeline, right?
It's day to day, basically, yeah.
Right. So if it was something to really be concerned about, he was going to be seeing a doctor for X amount of weeks, worst case scenario, months, to deal with it, get back to 100%, then I think the Celtics would be looking at a serious problem, because not to discredit Jrue, he is one of the players that is more expendable during the regular season compared to when you really need him the most, which is the playoffs. He is one of those players that you're not going to be seeing big nights out of him. It's not a win or lose situation if Jrue Holiday is on the court in some games, even though he is an elite player, great IQ for the team, helped to carry this team to a lot of wins, has definitely been a key factor in the Celtics finding success, especially winning their championship last year. But we just know how valuable he is when it comes down to the late runs. And there's enough depth on this roster to really help him get through that. So, like we said with our term with Kristaps Porzingis is the bubble wrap. I think Jrue Holiday has found himself wrapped in bubble wrap by the Boston Celtics, and I'm sure if other than if any reports come out during the All-Star break, I'm sure that we'll be seeing him return to action in a short amount of time, if not the first game back against Philly after the All-Star break.
It kind of reminds me of Al Horford at the end of January, where I mean, obviously it wasn't. I think there is some soreness, and I do think there is some injury there. Right, Seamus. But I think like for me, it kind of reminds me of that Horford thing where I'm on the precautionary side. I don't think Boston is worried about this. I don't think Jrue's worried about this. I think he could be playing, but it's like, listen, we're playing good ball right now. Pritchard's excelling. You just signed Torrey Craig, who we're going to talk about later. He played pretty well tonight, I'd say. And it's like, why push him, right? Why push him?
Well, for me, I think the timing of the injury, or really Jrue Holiday sitting out, is that to me looks more precautionary than a legitimate injury, just because of the All-Star break coming up. Because you consider the games in which Jrue Holiday is now sitting out, he's now going to have about a 2-week window where he's not playing NBA basketball, and that's going to do a lot for his legs later on in time. I know we're talking about his shoulder, but I don't know if there's a shoulder issue with Jrue Holiday. I think at this point in time, when Jrue Holiday is 34 years old, Jrue Holiday, what you need to preserve on Jrue Holiday are his knees, his ankles, his hips. I mean, that's really what we're looking at with Jrue Holiday, and that's what we look at with really older players in general, ultimately out there. And I think that 2-week rest can do a lot going ahead into the future for somebody like Jrue Holiday. You kind of mentioned Al Horford as well. Al Horford, we've seen those type of stretches with Al Horford, and there's a reason why we've seen guys like Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, and Jrue Holiday miss games this season. Those are the three players on the Celtics who really miss the most games, and it's not because they're perpetually injured. It's because the Celtics want to keep them fresh for a playoff run later on in time when the games matter the most. Right now, the Celtics know they can get through a lot of these games if Jrue Holiday misses a game, if Al Horford misses a game, if Porzingis misses a game, even Derek White or even Jaylen Brown at this point in time, the Celtics know they can still get through some of these games with all the talent they have. And I really think the Jrue Holiday situation can be more precautionary. And I don't see this necessarily as something that is going to be reoccurring later on in the season, just because of the timing at this point. But even so, if there was another moment in the season where Jrue Holiday was missing, I would still maybe lean on potentially it being more precautionary than legitimate, because I just really think that's the plan with Jrue Holiday. I think that's the plan with Al Horford. I think that's the plan with Kristaps Porzingis. Those are really the three players. Talk about bubble wrap. Those are the three players you want to put in bubble wrap, and I think this is really the perfect time to put somebody like Jrue Holiday, or to really rest Jrue Holiday through this current stretch, because you have a couple of opponents, if you're the Celtics, that you see the Celtics have played pretty well as of late, and we're gaining more confidence in the team to be able to handle these opponents. Now, you'd say in late December, early January, we're going, okay, guys can't really miss games because the continuity isn't quite there. The Celtics can't pull games out if they're missing guys. But now the Celtics are really starting to play more cohesive basketball. They're starting to make better decisions. They're starting to play better, which really gives us the confidence that some of these guys can go out and rest, and the Celtics still take care of business. But I really do think the timing, that's really the biggest thing for me, is the fact Jrue Holiday missing these games now gets 2 weeks of rest. And I think
Right.
that's pretty big for himself. And I think personally, he's a bigger he has more impact than a guy like Al Horford. I think Al Horford, for as much
Agreed.
impact as Al Horford has, I think you're going to have to see more minutes out of Jrue Holiday in the playoffs, and that's really going to be the matchup that matters more for the Boston Celtics, because he's going to be guarding some of the better guards when it comes playoff time, and even just throughout the season. Whereas Al Horford, he'll see less minutes. He'll still sit, one of the two back-to-back nights. Same with Porzingis, but Holiday, I think you're going to have to see more minutes out of him, and his matchups later on in time are going to be a little bit bigger than some of the big guys. And ultimately, I think this little stretch here for Holiday, it's going to be good for him moving forward. And I'm leaning on the side of the shoulder injury is probably not a shoulder injury. It's more likely the what's it called, the excuse for rest. As we all know, rest is essentially not a thing in the NBA anymore. You got to come up with some calf strain. You got to come up with a shoulder impingement. You got to come up with knee inflammation. That's just what it is in the NBA. So I wouldn't be too concerned about Jrue Holiday. But the one thing I would be concerned about, and we'll have to see what happens moving forward, that would actually raise some alarm bells with Jrue Holiday for me, is if we come out of All-Star break and then he misses a game or two games with this injury, then I'm starting to raised an eyebrow at potentially him actually having a legitimate shoulder injury. If he comes out of All-Star break, looks fine, plays multiple games in a row, I would just mark this off as just a glorified rest period. We saw this with Kemba back in the bubble. He missed a bunch of games because of knee soreness in February going into March, and of course COVID happens, comes back 4 months later, wasn't ready to play in the bubble. That's what really that was the beginning of the end for Kemba Walker in Boston when he came back and just he just had 4 months off. How is he
Right.
still dealing with knee soreness? How is he not ready to play? Won't be a 4 month stretch for Jrue Holiday, but if he comes back in a week from now and he's still dealing with a shoulder soreness or shoulder impingement or whatever it is, that's when I would start to raise an eyebrow and go, okay, maybe this is a little bit more serious. But for now, I think it's more precautionary.
I'm almost tempted to, out of the Boston side of things, like, do you look into maybe adding Jrue to one of the guys that you don't play on second nights of back-to-backs? And, I get it. Then you're really playing around with, okay, you're managing Kristaps, you're managing Al, you're managing Jrue. Those back-to-backs could be killer. But, you look at how some of these guys off the bench have been playing: Pritchard, Hauser, Cornette, Neemias. You just picked up Torrey Craig, who, in my opinion, looked very, very solid out there for his first game with this squad. I mean, it feels like Boston's bench right now is able to cover it, guys. And for me, I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, I've said it. It's probably precautionary. I agree. I don't think this is like a shoulder injury, but it's also like, if you're Jrue, you're 35, you're coming off of an exhausting NBA championship run, where any championship runs you're playing late into June is going to be exhausting, whether you go 16-0 or you don't. It's an extra 16 games of basketball that the other guys aren't playing. And then on top of that, you head to the Olympics and, you play an intricate part of what's going on there and with that Olympic squad. And then you come back, you get a month off, and then it's training camp. So it kind of feels like, this is a guy that, he's 35. That's 35 is kind of when your body starts to, turn. It gets a little bit harder. Do you guys think there's any value in holding Jrue out on second nights back-to-backs or picking and choosing with him? Or do you think the Celtics don't really have that depth and flexibility quite yet in doing so?
I will say that imagine if the Celtics were still on the stretch that they were on right now, and I would say absolutely positively not. That
Right.
we need as many men on the court as we possibly can have. We need as much talent as we can possibly muster, because now we're starting to look at the second and third seeds as the peak for the Celtics team. If they were still facing mediocrity, you're going to need to force Kristaps Porzingis, Jrue Holiday to put in maximum effort in Game 55 of the regular season to come out with a win that is obviously every game matters, but this is not the time to expense those efforts from your more what's the word I'm looking for? Players that you really can't have on the court as frequently as you do with Brown and Tatum.
Right.
You're looking at these guys, and you need to evaluate every single rep that you can get out of them, being able to make sure that they are comfortable within the offense, being able to feel comfortable on the defensive end, and are able to give you the maximum effort that you can. Because I would rather have Jrue Holiday rested and fully recovered than having to half-ass a game against the San Antonio Spurs in the middle of February and really busting himself up, and who knows, maybe get one of those shoulder injuries, really aggravate that right shoulder. If that is the case, who knows with the NBA nowadays, if his shoulder or his right ankle is injured because of the way they utilize the injury reports to rest players. But he could have re-aggravated that. And if you're going into round one with down Jrue Holiday, that is not a good sign moving forward. And that makes the series that you're about to go into much, much harder going,
Right.
especially when you're facing such young teams who are really fruitful with depth at the bottom end of the Eastern Conference playoff picture.
Well, Jrue Holiday, I kind of look at the whole back-to-back situation and go, it's getting a little sticky when you have to sit either Porzingis and Horford out on a back-to-back, and then you're also doing that with Jrue Holiday. It's kind of like, where do you slot in Jrue Holiday for his rest day with the back-to-backs? And that's why I think Jrue Holiday could be more of a free rester in that regard. I don't know if that's the correct term to use for that, but ultimately I could see Jrue Holiday. I think he is definitely a candidate to be resting back to backs. How consistently though, I don't know. It is an interesting idea. It just my whole thing with it is when you have three players, you're essentially resting one, at least one of the back to backs. What are your lineups going to look like on either one of those games? And are you just? I'm not saying the Celtics are necessarily throwing away both games, but you're kind of looking at it going, all right, we're going to have wonky lineups in both games, or at least one game you're sitting all three guys, and then the next night you'll have all three guys, and I will see how that progresses moving forward, especially later on in the season. I'm a little torn on that idea. Just I don't necessarily love Drew Holiday playing in back to backs. If you're also preserving Horford and Porzingis out there. Um, but it's also the lineups, it gets a little wonky in terms of what you want to do in those situations. Now, I will say at this point in the season, the Celtics cannot have that many more back to backs. I would say at this point, we probably have 4 or 5 more back to back situations on the schedule. If I'm not mistaken, I mean, the Celtics, they only have about 10 to 14 in a year. So with 30 games left, they should have not too many back to back situations. But it's really tough. It's really tough to gauge on when Drew Holiday and these guys should really rest because to me, I think the days in which they should rest sometimes shouldn't matter on the back to backs because I'm more of a fan of managing players' minutes on those occasions. I think that's actually going to be the more effective strategy for the Boston Celtics because if you're taking a guy out for an entire game, you're not using him, but maybe, just maybe, okay, you play Drew Holiday, maybe play him 15 minutes, maybe play him 20 minutes, maybe you put him on some sort of minutes restriction out there and just let him play a smaller portion of the game. I actually don't understand why teams don't do that more often. I think that would have solved the load management thing a long time ago. The Spurs, they started it all. They went up all 5 starters out on a nationally televised game. All right, get out of here. Why can't all 5 starters play 15 minutes and then the bench just take over the rest of the game? I've never really understood the whole, all right, we need to sit this guy down tonight. Just manage his minutes. Say a guy can play in a back to back, but play him 15 minutes here, play him 15 minutes the next night. All of a sudden, you have an accumulation of 30 minutes. That's only one game out of 2. It's like, I don't understand why that's not more of a strategy used. I would be more in favor of maybe managing Drew Holiday's minutes opposed to just sitting him out entirely because it does get a little weird with back to backs when you're sitting out so many players or really trying to when you're considering Porzingis, Horford, and Holiday all at the same time. But that's just kind of where the Celtics are with these type of players. Is when you have a veteran led squad, the Celtics are not the young team in the NBA anymore. They're in their prime ages and they're an older team in the NBA. And when you have players like this who are older, like Al Horford who's 38 and Drew Holiday who's 34, you need and Porzingis who's I wouldn't call him necessarily injury prone, but he is a little bit more fragile of a player out there. You definitely need to take precautions with those players, and how the Celtics go about that is going to be certainly up to themselves and interesting. But I'm more of a guy who's on the line of managing minutes over just sitting guys out one game or another. I think that's actually the route the Celtics should take, but I don't think we see the NBA or teams across the NBA really take that route too often. So Drew Holiday, moving forward with him, I think you're going to see him more in just back-to-back situations because I don't think that's definitive with him yet. But I also think there could be a possibility that they actually go ahead and do that later on in time. But how the Celtics are gonna really map that out, not really sure. If you play all three guys one night, all three guys sit the next night, or you play 2 on one night, one the other night, it's a really tough call for the Boston Celtics. And we've seen it burn them or really help them in the past. So that's what's going to be ahead on the schedule regardless.
We talk about consistency all the time, right? So, in my perspective, I think if we sit more and more guys like back-to-back nights, it's just not gonna work out with the lineups because we're not gonna know of like. I'm sure obviously Joe will know like the team we're facing on a back-to-back. We're gonna have these strategies as to who can make that step up if Jrue sits or make that step up when Al sits or KP sits though. But sitting 3 of those stars like back-to-back nights, like I just think that it might not be the best idea at this situation, especially the season that we've had all year long. I mean, the stretch obviously we've had the past 8 games is a different story, but this year, record-wise, it's not the best year to do that, I don't think. But obviously, we haven't seen Jrue Holiday as like out as much. But I know this week has been really kind of weird with his injury. But like I said, I don't really worry about this injury being something that he has to sit out back-to-back games. I think it's an injury where, we're just kind of taking it back to using this break as to see how he does managing it, and then going next week to Philadelphia to see how that goes. It's just going to tell the story of I think how it turns out for him.
So let me add this real quick to the back-to-back conversation real quick.
Yeah.
We have 5 more back-to-backs in the season, all right? 5 more back-to-backs. And here they are. So ultimately we have a back-to-back Toronto and Detroit on the road, both games on the road, February 25th and 26th. That's a situation where I know Toronto, we lost a terrible game in, but you're certainly looking at that Toronto game going, okay, that should maybe be a rest night for some guys within that one. But then after that, you have March 14th and 15th at Miami, at Brooklyn. So again, both on the road. Brooklyn.
And March 5th and 6th, too.
Oh, yes, March 5th and 6th. I just skipped over that one. Both at home against Portland and Philadelphia. Portland, they're a little bit better of a team than I will say a lot of people expected this season. But Portland, you're looking at that game. Even Philadelphia at this point in the year, you can look at both of those teams and go, okay, maybe one of those can be rest nights. Thank you for catching that one, Franco, because I totally skipped over that one. So I think that still counts 5, but
it does. I counted it as well.
Yeah, Miami and Brooklyn. The Miami and Brooklyn game. Miami's a little dysfunctional. Brooklyn is certainly dysfunctional. Those are both on the road. You can certainly turn the Brooklyn game into a rest day. And then you have again Portland, Sacramento. That's a West Coast road trip that the Celtics are on. One game is at 6 o'clock Eastern in Portland. And it's Sacramento. Who knows what Sacramento is going to be on at that point in the season with Levine and Valanciunas added to their lineup. But Portland again, yeah. So another again, just not Portland is a little better, more energetic than expected, a little younger of a team, more energy, more intensity, but not really too worried about Portland. That could be a game where the Celtics rest. But then you go ahead in the schedule, and then there's the 8th and the 9th of April at New York, at Orlando. Those could be big games within the standings. You never know how the Celtics are how it's going to play out in time. And am I missing one here? Or did I just go through all 5 here? So
you went through all 5.
All right. So, I mean, every one of those back-to-backs, you have resting situations. And I'll even point out with the New York and Orlando back-to-back later on in April. That's a back-to-back where the Celtics at that point in time could have their seeding wrapped up. They could still be going for the number 1 seed. They could have the number 1 seed, be trying to hold it from the Cleveland Cavaliers, or the Celtics could firmly be in that number 2 spot, and they could be 3 games easily ahead of the New York Knicks. And maybe that New York game is a little bigger, but Orlando, the Orlando Magic have been kind of falling off a cliff at this point in time. So you look at every back-to-back situation, there's only 5. And in every situation, there is at least one game where the Celtics can go, all right, Toronto, Portland, whoever it is, I think the Celtics can go ahead and just maybe rest a couple of guys in those nights. So this situation with Jrue Holiday and just everybody moving forward, Horford and Porzingis are certainly going to sit on those back-to-backs. But Jrue Holiday, yeah, there could be some rest days within there for Jrue Holiday, considering not only the amount of back-to-backs, but really the opponents as well. So I'll just add that to the conversation.